This is Holy Saturday. In a lot of traditions, this is just another day of the week while people wait moving from Good Friday to Easter. But if you're trying to feel the entirety, the weight of Holy Week, it's so important that we stop today on this Saturday and just sit. Our scriptures today talk about Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but a hidden one. And that was actually very common. There's an assumption that so many of Jesus' disciples were like poor fisherfolk, like Peter and John and that whole group. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus had followers from all socioeconomic states, all nations that were visiting Galilee or Israel, Judah rather. They came to him because they liked what he had to say. The Greeks, who had been for a century or two had been moving away from their own mythologies, loved what they heard. The Romans were exposed to that through either as guards or as just people who had migrated or were traveling in the area of Judah. People heard what Jesus had to say. But a lot of the rich were as cagey then as they are today. They don't necessarily want their affiliations known. So we have two men now, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who popped up in the beginning of the Gospel of John, and he's the one that has the conversation of how can you be born again. So here we have Nicodemus coming back to the scene. These two men who stayed in the shadows as much as they possibly could are now here in the shadows again to remove the body of Jesus. Pilate, if we remember the story from yesterday, wanted nothing to actually do with it. So when Joseph came to ask him for the body of Jesus, he was like, yeah, take it, go. There was no conversation. There was no challenge. There was no whoop-to-do at all. It was just like, take the body and go. And Joseph did, buried him in a cave, in a grave that was brand new, that no one had touched. And graves in that time were caves. They were dug in the rock, and bodies were left. They were covered with oil and perfumes and whatever, wrapped, and they were allowed to decay. Then they had the second burial where they just took the bones and put those someplace, and that was the full burial that was going on. But just as in so much of what Jesus' ministry overturns the status quo, here we have two very rich men doing the work of not only poorer folks, but women, really. Women were the ones that were to tend to the body, to make sure it was clean and ready. They didn't have time for anybody else. They didn't include anybody else. They, like Pilate, wanted to get it done as quick and as silently as possible, and they did. And then they went home and started their own Sabbath preparations. We need to sit, now that Joseph and Nicodemus have done what they needed to do, we need to sit with the fact that Jesus is dead in this time in our liturgical year. We have to sit with that mourning. We have to sit with that loss. We have to sit with the pain that comes and with the remembering of the people we've lost ourselves. The sadness that we feel when our friends or our family are no more. And it's really important that we do not rush Easter morning, because then it takes away the magnitude of the darkness and pain that was felt. And I'm not saying overdo it, because pain itself, and churches have notoriously done this, it becomes a fetish itself. And I'm not suggesting that at all. But we have to not rush to the conclusion. Holy Saturday gives us that opportunity to just kind of stay in place for a while. Read more scripture if you want to. There's certainly many, many suggestions online. Read the entirety of the narrative of any of the Gospels you want. But just stay in that moment. Do not rush to sunup on Easter morning. I promise you, Easter will feel so much fuller, so much more meaningful, if we just take the time to feel the sadness and the weight of this time in our liturgical year.